Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anna Toney. I am the Executive Director here at Leadership Toledo, and we are so excited for our final Community Leadership Series of the season, I guess, if you will, which was actually supposed to be our first Community Leadership Series. But as people might remember, there was a little hiccup in the library system back in the fall. So we're really excited to be here today with Jason Kucsma and Erin Baker from the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library. I would like to say thank you to our sponsor for the Community Leadership Series, First Energy Foundation. Without their support, this would not be possible. So without further ado, we get the opportunity to have a little fireside chat, as Jason and Erin called it, around, the importance of leading an organization during difficult times. Maybe that's the way to say it, but we're going to, there's a lot going on in our world today, and we're going to have a little conversation with them about, this idea of moving through leadership transition and mitigating a pandemic and reckoning with issues of racism, equity, and inclusion. So I'm very curious to hear what they're going to have to say today. So I will start with our bios here. So Jason Kucsma's 13 years of leadership in libraries comes after nearly a decade of leading a nonprofit independent media organization and publishing an internationally distributed politics and culture magazine while living in Northwest Ohio. Kucsma is a born and raised Ohioan who earned his bachelor's degree in communication and master's degree in American Culture Studies at BGSU. He earned his master's degree in library and information science at the University of Arizona before moving to New York City to work with public academic school and special libraries as executive director of the Metropolitan New York Library Council. Jason returned to Ohio in 2015 to assume the role of deputy director at Toledo-Lucas County Public Library. And he was appointed as the executive director in August 2019, where he helms a leadership team and staff of nearly 400 employees, providing world-class library services to the diverse community of Lucas County. His work in libraries is informed and driven by his dedication to the role public libraries play in building strong communities through equitable access to information and technology, and the expertise library staff bring to help navigate both. Awesome. We are so lucky to have Jason here leading us in this. Erin is the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for Toledo-Lucas County Public Library. Previously, she served as the coordinator for organizational learning and manager for Kent Branch Library. Her past professional experience includes working at University of Toledo as Assistant Director for Business and Marketing and Associate Director for Upward Bound, as well as the Assistant Director for Residential Marketing and Communication at BGSU. So we've got both. You've got UT and BG represented here. I love it. Before working in higher education, she served as the project manager for More Mentoring. And Erin received her Bachelor of Science from Northwestern University and Master of Business Administration from the University of Notre Dame. Currently, she is the mayoral appointed chair for the City of Toledo Human Relations Commission, vice president of the Toledo, Ohio chapter of the Links Incorporated, co-chair for the Northwest Ohio Northwestern University Alumni Admission Council, and volunteer for Habitat for Humanity Women Build. So you're not really that busy, it sounds like maybe you get like 1 or 2 hours of sleep a night. As a Toledo native, Erin fully embraces the slogan, "You will do better in Toledo," and truly believes we all do better in Toledo libraries. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Jason and Erin. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. And also, I think, I would love to hear a little bit also about the role that the libraries play in these topics, because I think a lot of times people have a very surface level of idea of what libraries play in our community. So I will let you guys take it from here. If any of our attendees have any questions, feel free to pop those in the chat and we will make sure to get that over to Erin and Jason. So take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. Hi, Erin. Good to see you.
Hi, Jason. You're just next door to me, but hi.
I know we very intentionally have not talked to each other this morning, so we can have something to discuss here today. Hopefully, you can't hear me talking through the walls and vice versa. But yeah, so even as Anna was reading your bio, you are incredibly busy. Tell me. So it's one thing to talk about your bio, but I sort of want to get sort of a personal, like, how did you get where you are right now? Like, tell me your story. What's your story?
Right. And I mean, we're in the library, so we love stories, right?
Right.
So in terms of my story and kind of where I got to be where I am today, it starts kind of when you're a kid, right? So I am the youngest of three. So go ahead and give me all of those things that you say about the youngest child. And I'm the only girl, so let's double down on that. And growing up, my parents would say there's two things that I love to do. The first one being read. So awesome. I ended up at the library. And the second thing was argue with my two older brothers. So at a very young age, everyone thought I was going to be an attorney. So fast forward, as Anna talked about, I went to Northwestern University and I hated all of my poli-sci classes, like hated them. But I loved all my communication classes. I hung out and continued to live in Chicago for a period of time. And it was the wake of 9/11 when I graduated from undergrad, and I worked in an immigration law firm literally across the street from the Chicago INS office. So super chaotic time, very diverse clientele, talk about stories I heard, talk about some laws I probably broke because I was more interested in helping people than actually adhering to the laws. Because people just had really sad stories about wanting to stay in the States. And so that's when it really confirmed for me, clearly law school is not for me, but I really loved helping people. I ended up returning to Ohio. And Anna talked about like my span of my career is from corporate all the way up to higher ed. And I got a chance to do a ton of different things, but in the mix of that, because clearly I don't like to do just one thing. While I was working at OI, I also got my MBA at Notre Dame. And I really fell in love with their motto of educating the heart and the mind. And it really kind of fueled my passion for wanting to give back and to help others. And that ended up turning into some volunteer work I was doing into a full-time job. Hence me working for a grant-funded mentoring program, which at my age today, I would probably never work somewhere where I didn't know it was going to be funded forever. But you know, you're young, so, and you want to help people. I was really fortunate that I had no gap. I was able to roll right from that position into working in higher ed because the university at that time had a hand in that granted funded program. And I had such a wonderful time both at UT and BG. But those of you who can see my background, I do have a UT placard above me. That's like a required thing for me because I have a lot of strong ties with the university. Although I didn't go there, everyone else in my family did. So, you know, I always refer to myself as being a UT baby, that I grew up there, even though I didn't go there. So, you know, being on those campuses at a young age and even later working on there, it was really awesome to kind of immerse myself in and I was really drawn to just this exciting opportunity to expand my reach and truly being a servant leader and be able to make some impactful service, because that's at the heart of everything I really love to do. And the library really aligned my passions and my personal desires and my professional wanting to give back and everything that I do in regards to the community and making very intentional on resources, aligning with purposeful programming. So I'm just so fortunate to really be here, and then in the midst of the pandemic to have this role created for me as being part of this really amazing, very diverse executive leadership team in my role. So super excited about that. So I guess I'm gonna throw it back to you, Jason. Why don't you tell me your story and how you came to be where you are today?
Yeah, thank you. It's funny. I was just looking back at my emails from when you and I first met, and it was back in May of 2018. And you had emailed me and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about this job you have open at the library, this manager position. Any chance you could talk to me a little bit about this position?" And I mean, I guess for anybody who's watching, who's thinking about how do I make opportunities for myself, that's a perfectly good example of like you reach out and you just ask people for a conversation, and that's where it went. And ultimately, ended up getting that job as the manager of Kent Branch. And I will say, just before I tell anybody about my background, you moved from the Kent Branch manager position into this position for coordinator of organizational learning. And I guess for folks' benefit, I had asked you to think about researching and building a program around equity and inclusion here for the library internally, mostly, so that we can address some of the things that were happening in our society at that time. And you dove into this work and you built this program that I think is just really impressive. And it was thoughtful, and it acknowledge that you're not going to do this work overnight, and that it's not our performance work. It's building foundations, it's building capacity, and it's building culture here. And so when I saw what you had built through that work and saw you present at that work at one of our board meetings, that was when, I think this, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but for the benefit of the folks watching, that was when I said, look, this is a position that needs to be part of the leadership team. And I was glad to have you accept that offer to join us on our small team. So how did I get to you? I guess going back to childhood, right? Like you said, I grew up in the east side suburbs of Cleveland, white kid living in a privileged community, went to Catholic grade school, high school, played on a state championship football team. And I was all but going to play college football. And it wasn't until we were all being recruited because we were state champs. And it wasn't until about May of my senior year that I was like, I'm not playing football anymore. I'm going to hang it up. I don't want to start over from scratch. And so I'm going to go to Bowling Green because that's where all my friends are going. I've got some family members who went there, and it seemed like an easy decision. And then I went in as a business major, almost failed statistics, and then decided to become a communications major. And so, and at BGSU, studying communications, working at the radio station, got involved in punk culture and was in bands and sort of this sort of underground subculture work. And through that kind of really got turned on to independent media and the role that independent media can play in amplifying underrepresented voices. And so through that, I had built this conference in Bowling Green started out as the Underground Publishing Conference, and then eventually the Allied Media Conference. And that was a nonprofit I was running alongside of this magazine after while I was in grad school, getting a master's in American Culture Studies. And then we eventually turned that nonprofit over to some folks in Detroit. So Allied Media Project still exists. It's over 20 years old now, which is I'm pretty proud of that, even though I had nothing to do with where they are right now. But and eventually I was dating my wife, Megan, at the time, and we were both talking about our plan Bs because we had handed off the nonprofit. The magazine was getting ready to shutter, and we were both talking about how we wanted to be librarians. And she was teaching at a charter school here in Toledo. So we packed up and moved to Arizona, got our master's in library science. And those are programs that there are a ton of virtual programs, but by being on campus, we had the opportunity to work directly with faculty. We ended up getting assistantships, so it was paid for. We did not expect any of that. So, I always tell people, if you're going to go to graduate school, find a way to get it paid for, because there's so many assistantships and so many ways to subsidize that work. And then, we both moved to New York City because we figured we wouldn't be competing with each other for jobs, not realizing that once we got there, there were 6 library schools right around the five boroughs. So we were competing with each other for jobs. I started working at the Metropolitan New York Library Council in May of 2008, which is right before everything kind of tanked. And so many of our colleagues that were in grad school at that time end up unemployed for the next couple of years. So super fortunate that we both landed in jobs that were non-traditional library jobs. And then, was loving that work, and eventually went from a digital services manager at that nonprofit to being the executive director, and then got a call about the deputy director position here in Toledo. And honestly, I told staff here know this, but my predecessor, Clyde Scholes, took a real flyer on me by bringing me on as his assistant director, because I had not worked in a public library at all. And my interest in public libraries came from being a grad student at Bowling Green and working in the pop culture library, working in the music and sound recording archives. And I was convinced I was going to become an academic librarian, working in special collections. But learning about the work in public library and then coming here and being able to do it, I'm kicking myself for not getting involved in it earlier, because it is so rewarding. It's such rewarding work, and to be able to see direct, tangible results from the work that we're putting in. So yeah, that's, I guess, where we are now. And I guess one of the, where do you get your passion for leadership? I mean, how obviously you said you kind of had to fight and claw your way with your brothers. I'm the oldest of two. My sister is about a year and a half younger than me. So we really, I was always the one, I guess, who set the template, and she resented me for setting expectations. But we have a great relationship now. But where do you find your passion? I mean, you're a leader in not just here at the library, but in so many other aspects of your life.
It's funny. I think for me, it's not even so much the leader part, it's the serving part that really drives me. I get so much reward, like you talked about here at the library, especially. Like, we do so much that's so rewarding, not only to the community, but for all of our staff. Jason, you have, your library science background. I don't have that background. So while Clyde took a chance on you, it was an even bigger chance that was taken upon me to come into the fold and lead a branch with no library background, but it felt so natural to me. I'd done so much programming in higher ed, which it's like insane amount of programming you do at a higher ed campus. But because I really enjoyed community service and giving back, it felt so natural, because that's just the inclination of everyone, all 400, some of us. That's just at the core of who we are, is giving back. And so what really just drives me, I think, is the notion of being connected constantly to my community and giving back to it, because it essentially gives back to me too. It's funny, I did work at a mentoring program, and I mean, I can't again be on here and be representing the library and not talk about a book. And so when I was in that mentoring program that was school-based and grant funded, we talked a ton about the origins of the word mentor, and it comes from Homer's Odyssey, which is, everyone knows, this epic tale of Odysseus traveling on this 10-year journey. But while he's gone, they're preparing his son to be the next ruler, and the servant whose name that trains him and prepares him, his servant's name is Mentor. And so that always kind of like really grasped me. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting. The notion of the word mentor is rooted in serving. And so when I think about being a leader, that's what I also think about. You're mentoring people, right? And so inherently, it just says that servant was being a teacher and was really providing this path to meet goals and things of that nature. I just think that that's what my role is. I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be serving. I'm supposed to be taking the time and the care to form all these relationships, especially for folks that are less experienced from me. I think we talked about the difference between mentors and sponsors. I think I've had fantastic sponsors, but I've been so fortunate that I've had really good mentors just in my own household. Some that I wanted and then it didn't want, and my parents and then my siblings, they've sowed so much into me that I think it's so important that I do that same thing in terms of the staff that I have, and organizations I'm a part of, just really making sure that I'm empowering folks to give them the necessary tools and resources and support to really excel in their own right. Because at the root of it, I'm not going to be here forever. So even in my serving, my legacy and my leadership is that I'm creating more leaders behind me. So how about you? What really fuels you, Jason?
Well, I want to dwell on something you mentioned. I mean, obviously, serving is at the core of this work, and I'll have to say, like, I think it paired with that is humility, right? And I think you mentioned coming to the library and not having any experience, and you dove into the work. You were pretty transparent about what you didn't know. I think you went through the Ohio Reference Excellence Program, even though nobody had asked you to do that, because you knew that there was gaps in your knowledge that you needed to do. And same thing happened here. I came to the library, and I'm sure there were hundreds of people who were like, who's this guy who's never worked in a public library? And what business does he have, leading us? And I spent that first year kind of on this sort of quasi apology tour. It wasn't an apology tour, it was a humility tour where we were kind of essentially working through a strategic planning process. But for me, it was a chance to meet everybody and to learn as much as I could from folks. I guess certainly I did not come up through a servant leadership model or framework, but it's certainly something that resonates with me. And I feel like so much of the leadership opportunities I've had to learn on the job and kind of create my own opportunities, which means I made a ton of mistakes and have not had really a ton of strong mentors, I don't think. And my folks are really supportive, but my dad was he was an independent businessman who sold insurance for his entire career. Great man, but didn't really have a whole lot of sort of professional touchstones that were relevant for me, I think. So, it's been about, I say, I guess part of the reason I find myself drawn to leadership is because I don't have any other skills, right? That whether I'm a dilettante or polymath or whatever you want to say, it's like my goal here is to really just sort of empower people, as you said, or remove barriers for people who are much smarter and much more talented than me to do really important work. And so that's, even still, in my role as deputy director, my job was to, again, remove barriers for the team that was reporting to me. And now I really look at my work as supporting the leadership team and how do I make sure that you all can do the amazing work that you do. And I joked that, or Anna mentioned this at the top of our conversation, that this was originally supposed to be back in November, right? And we had to postpone it because of the cybersecurity attack that we had. But we've kind of been in a crisis mode as an organization for the last 3 years. And it's something that I find really fascinating. For folks that don't know, I stepped into this role after my predecessor died unexpectedly in 2019. So from February of 2019, the organization has been through, a transition in leadership. We did a reorganization of our administrative leadership after I was appointed in August of 2019. We opened main library after renovation. And then, of course, we all know what happened, in March of 2020. And then, of course, we managed through this pandemic, and then we end up on the other side with this cybersecurity attack. And it's been such an education for me in learning what do leaders need to do during this work. And I'm curious to know, you were not on the leadership team the entire time during this pandemic or during the other crises, but sort of what kind of lessons have you learned, being in leadership at different aspects of this organization during so many really challenging times? And even at the library, we see people at all stages of their life, and there's trauma, there's joy, there's excitement, there's lots of dynamics to that. So I'm curious how you manage that, like in a crisis or during these difficult times.
Yeah, it's so funny. So if you want to know what you don't know, come work at a library. Because you have all these folks that are steeped in research and well-read, that's all. That's not all they do at work, but in their off time, they truly enjoy being information gatherers. And so I think that's when the lovely thing that I truly learned in the pandemic is that there's this wealth of knowledge all around me, and that this is a group of individuals that are going to persevere and be able to connect people to resources no matter what. That's the big beauty, and that they can change, reinvent and reform themselves in order to meet that challenge and overcome it. I know, I'm not going to do a sports analogy, although now that I know you came off of a state, I am going to totally work those in going forward. But for me, I think so much of me being able to work under pressure or challenge, it's so much about practice makes perfect. It's the preparation that starts long before that pressure even arrives. And for me, I had come from a college campus where we did so much preparation because mass shootings, unfortunately, mental health issues, addiction, alcohol, so much of that is rampant on college campuses. So I'd been through a lot of training, but been very fortunate that I didn't have to necessarily tap into that too much. A very small percentage of crisis management that I had to experience as a frontline person. Oh, but then you come to the public library. And I often joke about my first 60 days working in a branch. I pulled out everything in my toolkit. Mm-hmm. And anything from interfacing with homelessness, with individuals filing for unemployment, active psychotic moments of folks that are experiencing mental health issues in your spaces. And I think, lots of times, you come on a job, and especially when people don't necessarily know that you are necessarily know what you're getting into because you're not from a library. I definitely felt the staff kind of hang back and oh, let's see if she can handle this. And I was so fortunate to have had all that training well before, that I found myself like knowing what to do, how to respond appropriately. And I was able to really bring that in. And so it's funny. So somebody asked, what was our, I don't know if I'm going to give all the details of my first 60 days, but I will say this, you all don't recognize as a branch manager, you're basically like a facility operations person, public, so like the bathroom, toilet overflowed, like we had fire alarms going out, like all types of things that went on. And then also too, you're serving kids, like our wonderful relationship we have with Connecting Kids to Meals. I don't think people recognize we serve meals to kids after school every single day in all of our locations. So, but also too, at that time, pre-pandemic, we took on that partnership, but as a staff, we were the ones also temping the food, making sure we're meeting all those health requirements, those food department requirements and all. But all of that, even still, it was all about the training that we received to be able to be prepared to be able to meet those needs. And really, it's just, I think here at the library, more than any place that I've worked at before, it's just the notion of you can prevail and be able to act accordingly when you're in those kind of crisis moments or those really high pressure moments, because you're keeping the people at the center, your purpose at the center. That's the culture that we really create here, and being really proactive versus reactive, which was weird and difficult during the pandemic because it was a constant moving needle. But our communication and transparency has been tenfold as a result of the pandemic. And I think that's been such a huge strength coming out. I think our strength and our ability to still stay connected and being flexible in our programming formats, because we knew that the public still needed us no matter what. We were constantly trying to at least, I don't know, I'm not gonna say a step, maybe half a step ahead of knowing the curve of where things were with the pandemic to still meet those needs, because we knew people needed us.
Yeah. And I like how you mentioned, just trusting your training and your experience and your education, because I think, none of this we're necessarily prepared for directly. I certainly did not learn in graduate school how to run an organization after the director dies unexpectedly. Like that is just, that was just, but at the same time, having run a smaller nonprofit organization, like you, I was the CFO, I was head of HR, I was also head of programming, head of everything. So you learn a little bit of everything, and you kind of just have to trust that experience that you build up. And ultimately, when we dealt with a crisis in February, and then going through what was a pretty lengthy search for the new director, which was challenging for me as someone who was the interim director, but also was a candidate who was also was intentionally brought here to be the successor, but he was not here to kind of talk through that process with the board of trustees. And so it was a long process, a challenging process for me professionally to kind of keep my own, irrational concerns and fears in check. I was like, this is going to work out if it's going to work out. But even during those moments, early moments when Clyde had died, and then the moments, when we realized the pandemic, the various stages, as you mentioned, there were so many phases along the last couple of years where we had to make difficult decisions. It was a matter of just trying to stay calm, trusting our experience, trusting the experts that we were working with. And again, as you were saying, communication. I feel like an organization, I think you can see what an organization values when you watch it perform during a crisis. And I think our last strategic planning process that we did back in 2016 really laid out our values to be welcoming and innovative and collaborative, accountable, and making decisions based on those values really helps guide the organization. And I think it's difficult, or it's interesting to think about how you change the culture of an organization that's been run by the same person for over 3 decades. And it takes a long time to change culture, but we've, as you said, we've really focused on being transparent, being accountable, and trying to be an empathic or an empathetic organization, both for our staff and for the community, because we do see people at so many different stages. Somebody had asked if there's things that we would like to share about the library that people might not know about. And I guess one of the things I would mention, you mentioned the work that we do with Connecting Kids to Meals. We work with a lot of partners, and one one of the hallmarks of our new list of strategic priorities is to invite our partners to use the library as a platform. In the past, it may have been our agenda, our focus to try to do the things that we think our community needs, but we're librarians and we're library staff. We don't necessarily have all that expertise. And at the same time, there is no other institution where you can show up for free, regardless of what you have, where you came from, who you love, what the color of your skin is, and being able to inviting our community members to use the library as a platform that is trusted by the community, I think is a real key for us. And so thinking about how we work with healthcare providers to address what I think is going to be a huge both mental and physical health crisis we're dealing with on the back end of this pandemic. What are some things that you'd like to share with people that they may not know about the work that we do?
Yeah, I cannot echo, the work that we're doing specifically to be very intentional with our partnerships, to be able to bring services into our locations, because also it's funny, it has a really not only a service outward to the public, but it also kind of gives some relief to our staff, because again, having worked in the branches, I have been asked more questions about trying to diagnose people. Well, you can give me a book on that, or you can, but in living in the age of so much misinformation, it is such a gem to work in a place that is looked at as a reliable source, as a place that can be trusted. And so we really want to maximize on that by being able to encourage some people to get some much needed service that they might be hesitant about. Bringing in nurses, bringing in, it's the justice bus that's going to be providing free legal support and assistance. There's just so much that we're trying to do to be able to help people to just know, okay, these are people that we've vetted for you, that you can trust to be able to help you. And I mean, just today, I was sending out messages that we're super excited about the fact that we're going to be rolling out the capability for people to check out hotspots, because we do know that there is some digital inequities that exist across the county, and we want to be able to have people truly be connected in all the ways that are necessary for them to be connected. And while as much as I think the public might want us to be open 24 hours, we know we are not. But we know that business still needs to go on outside of our hours, and people still need to be able to do things academically with their work. And we really want to make sure we're providing those services. I mean, I think we could talk the whole rest of our time.
Right. Yeah. But I want to get back to culture a little bit. You're right. We could easily run down the list. And I was just sharing with somebody this morning about the work that our small business and nonprofit team does. It's two people, Zach Huber and Linda Fairweather, who just are knocking out of the park and helping small businesses connect with the resources they need, whether it's money or talent, expertise. But there are a couple of questions that did come in around culture, and I want to talk about that a little bit because it's really important to me. I had somebody who was a colleague, a fellow leader in their community, who said to me offhand in a conversation, like, culture seems really important to you in your organization. Pardon me. And I was like, absolutely, because I feel like that is where your organization begins and ends. I mean, if the staff do not feel like they are part of the decision-making process, that they're heard, that they're valued, if there are not systems in place to hold people accountable. One of the questions that came in is how do you get people who have been in an organization for a long time on board with change? And I think one of it is, the first step is recognizing that change is hard for people, regardless of where they are in their career, and pointing and trying to help identify the benefits of the change that we're going through. And at the same time, we know not everybody's going to come along with us, right? And so I think that's where I struggle with staff morale, or even our own morale as a leadership team. Like, how do we keep showing up every day when things can be very difficult, when things seem like they're changing so quickly all the time? It's just really important, I think, to have that accountability factor. And you and I have talked about this a little bit, that if you've got people who are not being held accountable, that tends to poison the well in all different aspects of the organization, because other people, why should I try if that person's not being held accountable to the same expectations? And so we're an organization that we have 400 people about scattered throughout the entire county. Communication is a challenge for us. We do have people who have been here for over 30 years, some of the most incredible staff members. And there are also some of those folks are probably not as happy with some of the changes that we brought as well. And I think it's been our job as a leadership team to outline why those changes are important, that we're not doing them just to make things difficult for people. I was curious what your perspective is on how we've managed change as a leadership team in the last year or so.
Yeah, I think you're so right. Like the first and foremost was our recognition that change is hard, and being right out front with that, and really letting people know and understand that we recognize change is hard, but we really are asking everyone collectively to lean into like that uncomfortable feeling, and tying that uncomfortable feeling towards our ultimate strategic priorities, which were very much aligned with not only things that we learned in terms of best practices from our last set of strategic priorities, but even things we learned through the pandemic, and also direct feedback from our own staff,
Yeah.
And so it's so many voices that are intertwined. And so, like you said, Jason, as we have folks that question things, we tie it back to our priorities, but moreover, we also tie it back to like a level of accountability across the board for everyone. And that even includes our executive team too. And so it's so important that our staff really sees that us as an executive team, us leaning into that uncomfortable stuff, us doing the work and really modeling that behavior. Because otherwise, they're like, well, we're changing, but you're not.
Right.
And so it really has to be like an entire cohesive effort, and a recognition that it's not going to be pretty always. It's not going to be the greatest every day, but we all have the same common goal that we're trying to reach in the end, which is so great for us, because no matter if you've been here 3 days working for us or 30 years, everybody that works here is all about bringing that source of being the place that everyone can rely on, that the community comes to, that we're trusted, that we can meet your needs. That's something that we don't have to worry about. And we're so fortunate in that. Other places, some people just show up, collect their check and leave. That's just not what we have with our staff across the board here.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've had a number of folks ask, like, are we having problems hiring? And we right now are hiring at an unprecedented level since probably 2012, since some of the retrenchment that we went through. We're hiring a ton of people, and I think it's because people do recognize that we're trying to build a culture here of accountability and empathy within our organization. Somebody had asked how we have managed kind of learning on the job as young leaders, and I have to qualify this. I am not a young leader anymore. I've got good genes, but I just turned 48, and I love being lumped in with some of our 30-year-old our leaders in their 30s. But I don't feel like a young leader. I feel like I've earned my lumps by. I will never be able to retire because I did not get my full retirement career until well late in my career. But anyway, I was curious. Do you feel pressure from colleagues to know everything as a young leader or someone who's working through this?
Am I still considered a young leader too?
Yeah.
I'm in my 40s, but I'll take it. I don't necessarily feel the pressure now, but I don't think I ever felt any pressure throughout my career until I started working here at the library. And that again is because there was that gap of direct knowledge, having gone to library school. And if you want to be able to hurry up and expedite kind of filling those gaps and learning on the job, but make sure you have tough skin. What I did was I did a 360 evaluation with my staff, and I let it be anonymous. They were brutal, but I came back to them and I said, okay, I see where you're saying the things that I could do better. And so now that you've said that, I need y'all to help me. And that was like the greatest thing that I could have ever done. And it has helped to forge such great relationships where I recognize that as a leader, I truly do not own the desire to know everything. There's no way I could do all the things that Anna talks about that I do.
Right.
If I was trying to do everything. I think it's so important to honor other folks' expertise, other people's skill set. And I'm always going to acknowledge them. And then in turn, they're going to work their butt off for you. I see that time and time again. And it helps me too, because well, I will have no problem sitting down, taking the time to have a better understanding of what someone does. And I'm happy to do grunt work and all that kind of stuff. In turn, I'm also helping to groom them about how they should be a leader too, because lots of times people just want to be heard. I think especially for me coming into the role I'm in now, as the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Director, I say all the time, I cannot speak for every person's experience, because I haven't lived everyone's experience. So I rely so much on amplifying the voices of all of the diversity that we have here at the library. I need their representation. I need them to be reflecting their own personal cultures and showing up authentically in the programs that they do, to also just who they are every day in their job. And so I think for me, the way I've kind of filled those gaps is kind of lifting other people up and being very transparent of what I don't know and what I need to like to know.
And I think that transparency, that humility does build trust with your colleagues, with the folks reporting up to you or working alongside you 100%. And I think probably one of the greatest compliments I've had when I left my other organization in New York, one of my employees said to me that you make us want to be better employees. You make us want to be better at our job. And I was like, I wish I could say that was conscious and that I was trying to cultivate that. It was very flattering, but I think it ultimately is like trusting people to do good work and to help remove some of those barriers. There was some questions coming through here a little bit. And since you mentioned your role as this director of EDI, how do we move away from sort of, this me culture or a culture of individuals to appreciating difference? And I want to ask you that, what it looks like from your position, but I want to preface this by mentioning to folks that, one of the things I was so impressed with the work that you've done, especially over the last year or so, is that we've got groups that have worked on, Black History Month or Women's History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month. And you've managed to kind of work them through a transition to become these inclusion work groups that don't just focus on February as Black History Month, but are trying to do work both for programming and internally for our culture around those celebrations, those sort of notable. That work has been really important, and we're seeing we're seeing it pay dividends tenfold just by the work that we've seen come out of those groups for programs. How do you think we're shifting that culture here at the organization?
Yeah, so it's funny, as I've talked to other kind of colleagues in this similar role across the country, one thing they often say to me, like, well, Erin, you only were in your position before you were in this one for a very brief time, pretty much the entire pandemic. And I see what you're doing here. You've rolled a lot of like that leadership development, that learning component into your new role. And they're right. And what I first did was I sat down with all of these groups and we had that time had 3 that focused a lot of their efforts around a particular heritage or history months. And I said, okay, let me just hear how you think it could be better. And time again, I kept hearing them say, well, I wish we could highlight these programs year round, not just, and I said, okay, well, did anybody tell you couldn't? Well, let's do that then. And then on top of that, when I formed these teams, first I let people sign up. I let them decide they wanted to be in the room. Mm-hmm. I was very intentional in saying, I want you to really think hard as you make this decision to join these groups of how you connect personally, how you identify in your personal life. So people fully understood that I want you to bring that into these coordinator kind of work groups. But then I also was very intentional in saying that you could be anybody and be on these groups. You don't have to be a librarian. You don't have to be a manager. If you identify and you want to help kind of move the needle forward in telling these stories, we want you to be in the room. And because inevitably that also in the back of my mind said, okay, and this gives me a chance to expose all types of folks in our organization to various aspects, and might kind of intrigue them to be interested in going forward with a different path. And then that in turn, I just went to an event yesterday with some folks from these work groups, and I refer to them as like the next generation of our library leaders. And that's super exciting that we now have gone from 3 work groups to 7 work groups groups, and they're so diverse, and they're celebrating that diversity 12 months out of the year. And because before they felt like they were being siloed, before they felt like, oh, maybe there was other groups that got more financing than, and that was not true. So we were super transparent about that as well. And we just have so many people now coming to us and saying, how can we partner? How can we do more programs? And we are able to clearly say to them, well, the expectation isn't just for do one program. How can you work with us throughout the year? And even in terms of like our book collections, our promotion of books on Instagram and on Facebook, everything is very much intertwined, because the reality is that none of us are just one thing. And we're for sure not that one thing during that 1 month. And just, this morning I got a message from a manager talking about how it meant so much to one of her staff members to attend an event Tuesday. It was a Women of Toledo event. And again, these are folks who are not managers that normally wouldn't necessarily be the ones to go to those kind of events, and how they walked away so inspired. Because they got to talk about what they do at the library. And there were so many people that they didn't always get to hear these stories of people at these types of events to say to them directly, I thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you so much for me being able to walk in those spaces and seeing myself, or having my children see themselves. I appreciate you so much. And so it's been a really great chance for me to learn so much, because I don't know all the stories of all these various diverse aspects. And also too, just to be able to advocate for their work, and having my colleagues kind of really standing shoulder to shoulder with me to help support that work has been super exciting.
Yeah, and I think so. I didn't mention this before, but the framework that you created is called the Big Idea. So build, improve, and grow in areas of inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And you and I talked initially about, should this be something we require staff to do, or is it something? And I think we landed on like, no, this should be something that people want to do. And so that they hear their colleagues talking, using certain vocabulary, being involved in certain activities, that it's something that they don't want to be left out of. And I think that's happened with the inclusion work groups, especially, but also with some of the other programs that we've been working on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I know when we first, so if folks are clear, I've been in this role now for a year, but I've been doing the work for 2 years.
Right.
And I know when I first gave the proposal to you, like I had specific deadlines. I wanted things done by a certain date because everything needed to be measurable. And you were like, well, Erin, maybe we should just see how it goes. And I was real uptight about that. I was not happy. And it's been really great, because while yes, we have over time started to require certain components, it's been the notion of people really gravitating, and even more recently, we've had folks saying, can we do more? We want more trainings. We want more opportunities to have, I talk about leaning into uncomfortableness as part of changing. We went through a whole series last summer of talking about having courageous and critical conversations. And that's all wrapped up with accountability as well too. And so it's super exciting to hear people, we say we wanted to do things, but to hear people come back to you and say, yeah, come on, give me more. We want more of this kind of stuff. It's so important. And I've been seeing the change, not only in what we do externally, but how even folks kind of feel more connected internally as well too.
Absolutely. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to invite folks to put any questions they might have in the chat window. But while we're waiting for that to come in, I wanted to ask you, why Toledo? Why did you want to come back? Obviously a family here. Were there other factors that made you want to come back here?
Why did I come back to Toledo?
Only because people ask me all the time, and I will say, I got that question a lot when I was leaving New York City. They're like, "You're going to Toledo?" And I guess I'll answer first by saying that when I lived in Northwest Ohio now more than I've lived anywhere else in the country, and I knew that we had an incredible library system here. Ohio folks here probably don't realize this, but Ohio public libraries are some of the best in the country, and a part of it is because we have state funding that is dedicated for libraries, and we advocate, that it's not an accident. It's because we have great relationships with our legislators. It's because we continue to show the value of what the library brings to a community. But I knew our library system was incredible here, and I knew that Ohio libraries as a whole were great. So the folks in New York, they'd be like, "Why?" they said, why are you going there? And I said, well, look, I'm moving to a place where we can think progressively about how a public library can serve a community in the future. But when I was in New York, there were public libraries that were struggling to, have their facilities be, have the right temperature. So they're just struggling to kind of provide basic services to the community, where we were able to think more creatively and progressively about that. So I was glad to come back. Obviously, the quality of life here, and the cost of living are huge factors. And I was, when I got the call, I had 5-month-old twins living in an 800 square foot apartment in Brooklyn. So the idea of spreading my wings a little bit back in Toledo area was pretty compelling. What about you?
Yeah. So for me, yeah, Chicago was not cheap. Like cost of
No.
living was, and you're right. I used to get that question all the time. Like, why did you leave Chicago? I love Chicago. Even when I first moved back, I think my family would say I was in Chicago probably every single weekend. So I moved back in 2005. That's amazing to me that it's been that long that I've been back. But it was probably one of the best decisions I ever made. That 16, 17 years, I've accumulated experience in marketing, programming, customer service, public relations, obviously equity, diversity, and inclusion. I would have not gotten those opportunities, I don't think, had I stayed, and these are like leadership roles that I got at a very young age that the competition is so much higher in those places. And I just got so much greater access and opportunity to really develop professionally as a leader. I know Jason's not from Toledo. I'm from Toledo originally. And I know when I was in college, the term brain drain was super popular and talking about, the number of young professionals that move away. But as Anna talked about at the top, I really, really, truly embrace our slogan that you will do better in Toledo. I truly believe that. Because there is no better place. Yes, I can own a home and still travel. Like that's huge. Like some of my other friends, like on the West Coast, are like, well, you can come visit me. Like, like, oh, how are you going on traveling and things like that? But so that is a huge plus. But just me, especially being so much rooted in my profession and wanting to give back. What other place would I want to give back than my hometown? What other place would I rather be and do that? I can't say I've always felt that way, but definitely, as my career has grown over the years.
Amen to that. Giving back to the community where you grew up. I will say too, just to put a highlight, something you said was about access. When I was in New York City, I was there for about a decade. Working with some of the leading libraries in the country, but I couldn't have a conversation with the mayor. I could not have access to the same kind of leadership opportunities or conversations that we have here. And I think that's something that's really huge. Anna's coming on screen, and somebody did want to ask about, somebody asked a question about the same cafe opportunity that we have coming up here, which is, briefly, I'll talk about, we are really excited to bring this new model of a nonprofit restaurant into the library this year. It's a model that is tested and tried in Denver, Colorado, and the same cafe was looking for a place to expand nationally and had some conversations. They were looking for places here in town and had conversations with us. Really aligned well with the work that we're doing. It's hard to run a for-profit restaurant in a public library, but this model I think is perfectly suited. And so we hope that by working with Same Cafe, we'll be able to create a model that might be useful for public libraries around the country. And that's really exciting. One of the goals that I came back here with as a deputy director with the express intent to really put a national spotlight on our library system and the community in whatever way that I could, because I knew that it was sort of an unsung gem here. And we know that the Toledo area is sort of an unsung community as well. So being able to put that spotlight on here because people are doing great work. Yeah. Well, before we turn it over to Anna, I wanted to just say thank you, Erin. And I appreciate you. When Anna invited me, or the folks from Leadership Toledo invited me to do this, I said, nobody wants to hear me talk for an hour, but I would be glad to have a conversation with Erin if she would do it. And then you agreed to do this. So thank you for that. And I appreciate all you do for me and for our team, for the system here.
Yeah, and I appreciate you keeping me on my toes when you said, no, we're not doing a presentation. We're just going to talk. Roll.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Anna.
Yes, thank you. I didn't mean to like throw you off with the camera coming on to be like, hey, it's time to go. But no, there are so many wonderful nuggets of information that you guys put here. And I mean, I think just to summarize a couple of the big things that I heard from this was the biggest theme that I heard was about culture. And it sounds like you guys are really creating a open and welcoming and uplifting culture, with whether that's within the library or within your own lives. And this idea of, everyone has a story. And so you're celebrating that, and you're bringing that to your workplace. And so I really appreciate that. And I think that's a really good message there. And this idea of, being there, being committed to the mission and the vision of the work that you're doing, and you get those people on board, and then, it's fun. It's fun to do what you're doing, and it's fun to be a part of that. So I just really, that was one of the biggest things that I took away. And we're so lucky to have both your leadership here within the Toledo region. And I think this is, as the comments are coming in, loving what you had to say. And we're excited for the different opportunities that are coming for the library. And just thank you all so much for sharing your time with us today, because I know time is one of the most precious things that we have. And so the fact that you're willing to share that with us and the other 35 individuals who are on here today means a lot. So in the chat box, we will put a survey in there, and it will also be emailed out to you. Any feedback that you have, we would love. Finally, we do have we're going to be at the library next Saturday, actually, for one of our youth conferences. So if anyone out there has any high school students or knows of any high school students, we'd love to have them sign up. It is free to attend, no cost, all materials, food, all of that will be provided. So, we're really excited that we get to bring people into that beautiful space. And if you haven't been to the downtown library, you guys are missing out. Just go walk around. It's like, that was another thing I took when you were talking about the different, like the role that a library plays. I was like, for me, it's such a nostalgic place. So I go in and I just feel very comfortable there. Like I can walk into a library in like another city, and I go in there and I'm just like, oh, I feel like at home here. So I think that's really comforting, like thing about libraries. So so I encourage you, if you haven't been to the downtown library, to go. But anyways, thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And look, we have 2 minutes to go. So I mean, we're ending like right on time. All right, everyone.
Thanks again.
And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you all. Take care.